Hi amigos, my name is Pam. I read a lot of books and I'm here to talk about some of the books that I read in the past month. This is another monthly wrap up. This time for the month of August. I read a lot of books, a lot of very exciting books, a lot of books that had been highly anticipated for me, so I'm excited to talk to you about them. I am going to try to be relatively fast with these recaps, just giving you my overall thoughts, not really diving deep into the plots, and staying spoiler free as possible because I tend to yap a lot. I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm gonna try to be concise and yeah, just as succinct as possible. So hopefully I can do that. I always say I'm going to try to be fast and efficient, and then I just start yapping and it gets lengthy, but I'm going to try my best this time. Side note, I apologize if you hear like some snoring in the background. That's my dog Pepper, and she's snoozing right now. She's a little old lady, so she's got some pretty intense snores. Please forgive. And we are going to start off on a high note because at the beginning of this month, I actually did a reread of one of my all-time favorite books. You may have already seen the reading vlog for it. I put it out a couple of weeks ago, and that is none other than Bunny by Mona Awad. I read this book for the first time back in 2023 and fell so in love with this book and with Mona Awad and her writing. She is incredible, one of my favorite writers. I think she's just a genius, and I loved this book when I first read it, and she has a new book coming out this month that is a follow-up book to this book, Bunny. So, since it had been a few years since I first read Bunny, I wanted to do a reread to refresh my memory, get ready for her new book, and that's what I did. And when I first read Bunny, I knew that this book was going to slap on a reread because it's the kind of book where you don't know what's going on. There's a lot of crazy things that happen, some reveals, some twists and turns. So on a second read, I definitely got a lot out of it. I feel like I understood what Mona Awad was trying to say, what she was trying to do with this story. So this book is a lot of times labeled as a dark academia book, but I would say compared to like the quintessential books that we think of as dark academia, or like the ones that kind of sparked that trend, that genre, which would be like The Secret History by Donna Tartt, or If We Were Villains by Emil Rio. Those books are the quintessential dark academia, and I feel like if we compare Bunny to those books, it is kind of like in a league of its own. It's doing something different than I think those books aim to do, but it does have the elements of taking place in an academy of higher education. It does have like pretty dark themes and a dark mood and atmosphere. So in that way, I think maybe it does have a lot of the elements of dark academia, but I think it's more of a satire. It's taking those elements and then giving them like a little twist. So yes, this takes place in a fictional Ivy League school in New England. And we're following our protagonist Samantha, who is a master's student in creative writing. She's in her final year and writing her thesis, and it's a very small and prestigious program. So it's only her and 4 other women in her cohort, and she feels very isolated from her cohort. The other 4 women are very close. They're kind of a pack. They're best friends. They move together as a unit and they call themselves the Bunnies. And they're kind of like these hyper feminine, very girly, very cutesy, very coquette girls. And Samantha just feels like an outsider within her cohort. She has a dislike of these women. But one day they invite her to take part in their writing workshop, which they call the Smut Salon. And Samantha has been going through some writer's block. She's just struggling to write her thesis. So she decides to join them for this workshop. Things go from there. It gets really crazy. I won't spoil anything, but it's very wild, very fun. And I think the first time I read Bunny, I was like, okay, Mona Wad, she's, critiquing academia. She's critiquing like the type of writing programs that she was a part of, because Mona Wad has a master's, I think maybe a PhD in creative writing. So she's gone through it. She's very familiar with academia and with these types of programs. So I was like, okay, she has like an insider look into this type of program, and she's like writing some commentary on that. And she's also talking about like female friendship, femininity, loneliness, mental health. Those were like my main takeaways when I first read Bunny. And now that I've read it again, and now that I've read the follow-up, I think those things are all very present and prominent in this story. But I think the main thing that Mona Wad is trying to do with the Bunny verse, the Bunny world, is talk about creativity as a whole and creating art and being subjected to critiques on your art and influences and being blocked creatively, and what it means to like really put your heart and soul into the things that you create. So yeah, I think I was just able to understand that a lot better with the second read. And in We Love You Bunny, which is the sequel, I read the advanced copy through NetGalley. I think in this one, Mona Wad dives even deeper into those themes. And I think maybe it was like a combination of like this reread was fresh on my mind. It was the second time around. I felt like I understood it a little better. But I feel like in We Love You Bunny, it was just like so much more clear to me that that's what the theme of the story was. Like creation and killing your darlings was like a big through line of this story. So in this one, it follows the events of Bunny, but it's a few years after the conclusion of Bunny. And in Bunny, we're mostly just following Samantha. And in We Love You Bunny, we actually get to see the perspectives of each of the bunnies. In the first book, they kind of moved and behaved and talked as a single entity, as the hive bunny mind. But in We Love You Bunny, we get to see them individually, how they came to be this group of very close friends, and just like their individual wants and needs and motivations and desires, which was very cool to get in this book. We also get another very fun and interesting and creative point of view that I won't get into just to avoid spoilers. But yeah, Mona Wad, she's just so creative, and like every time I read her books, I'm just like blown away by how much creativity and uniqueness she infuses into her stories. I absolutely loved this book. It is significantly longer than the first book. It is very indulging. It goes deep. It languishes. It takes its time. It is very like self-referential and meta and just very silly at times. So if you were not a fan of Bunny, if you have read Bunny and you weren't like super into it, this book just gets like even deeper into that world. It gets like even sillier and goofier, but while still like having a very interesting story to tell. But yeah, if you weren't a fan of Bunny, like this is just more of that and like ramped up to another level. So maybe this won't be the book for everybody, but it was definitely the book for me. And if you're a Mona Wad fan, like this is Mona Wad at her best and cleverest and most genius. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this book. I liked the Frankenstein feelings for a lot of the chapters, the exploration of like humanity and how the writing style for a particular character grows and evolves and changes throughout the story. I thought that was very fun and interesting. And more so than Bunny did, this one really like it touched me. It made me emotional towards the end. And I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just because I was like, maybe this is the last time we're in this bunny verse. And I was feeling bittersweet about that. But I don't know. I got emotional towards the end, which I thought was funny because it's a kind of a bonkers book. But just Mona Awad manages to really like get deep in my psyche, deep in my heart. So yeah, 5 stars to both of those. I am a huge Mona Awad fan, and I will read anything she writes, but I'm so glad that she decided to do a sequel for Bunny. I had a great time, and like I said, I did vlog my reading experience for both of those, so you can go and take a look at that. I did spend like multiple weeks reading those books, so kind of a lengthy one, but I had fun. I was taking my time and loving it. So yeah, that was my reread of Bunny and We Love You Bunny, which comes out September. I'll confirm, put the date up here, but yeah, it's coming out soon. Definitely check it out. Thank you to NetGalley, to Mona Awad, to Simon Publishing for allowing me to read an advance copy. Okay, next I read not the newest Silvia Moreno Garcia, but one of the newer ones. This one came out last year. The way that Silvia Moreno Garcia pumps out books and they're all so incredible, needs to be studied. Like, that woman, she is a witch. Like, she controls time and bends time, and somehow she's going back in time to give herself more time to research and write incredible books, because year after year she puts out bangers. And this Silvia Moreno Garcia, The Seventh Veil of Salome, this book came out last year, and this is her take on like an old 50s Hollywood story, but it's also her take on a biblical. This is also her take on a biblical story. So we follow 2 different POVs. Well, actually, we follow a lot of different POVs, but the story is revolving around 2 different women in these 2 different times. So in the 1950s, we're following Vera Larios, who is a Mexican actress, and she has come to Hollywood. She's new to Hollywood, and she's trying to break into the film industry. And she was recruited, actually, from her job in Mexico to come work in Hollywood. And yeah, she's just like an up-and-coming star. They cast her for the role of Salome in a new biblical-inspired movie. And then the other story that we're following is Salome's actual story. So in the 1950s, in Hollywood, they're doing a movie about Salome. But in this book, we're like going back to biblical times and hearing about this story from Salome's perspective. So I don't know how well known this story is. Like, it may be like common knowledge, but I just don't know the Bible very well. I've heard of Salome. Like, that name sounds familiar to me. King Herodes, what's his name? Yeah, like some of the names of the characters I recognize, like Herod. Okay, that's kind of it. John the Baptist. Sure, like I've heard these names before, but I didn't know the story of Salome. So that was very interesting to read, especially from her perspective and like the way that Silvia Moreno Garcia writes it, which I'm sure is not like 100% true to the Bible. Like, I'm sure the Bible didn't give Salome such a deep perspective. Being a woman in biblical times, as we can imagine, was probably not the best. So I'm sure Silvia Moreno Garcia took some liberties in writing from her perspective, and like we see Salome as like a fully fleshed woman and a fully fleshed character. So that was really cool to see. I was very interested in her story. It was kind of crazy. Like, I didn't know the story at all. But then, yeah, on the other side, we're exploring like 1950s Hollywood and what it would have been like for a Mexican up-and-coming young woman actress at that time. And it's Silvia Moreno Garcia, so you know she's going to incorporate like what the issues of the times were. And we see how hard it was for Vera to have a say in her decisions. And we see the racism that she faces, the prejudice, how she's getting attacked by the media, how she's wanting to be taken down by fellow actresses who are white and who don't see her as a worthy contemporary, a worthy competitor for these big Hollywood roles. So yeah, it was a very interesting one. In terms of the writing, I feel like this is Silvia Moreno Garcia's best to date, or I really enjoyed her writing in this. The style, the prose was just really, really nice. I could have done maybe with like a few less point of views. There was a lot of characters and we like jumped back and forth between a lot of their POVs, which just made it a little jumbled in my mind. Like I was very interested every time we were in Salome's perspective, every time we were in Vera's perspective, but all the other ones were just kind of blending together for me, so I could have done with a few less, but that was kind of my only critique of this. Everything else was really cool. If you are into historical fiction, if you're into old Hollywood, definitely recommend this one. I gave this 4 stars. And I'm excited to read Silvia Moreno Garcia's new book, the one that came out this year, The Bewitching, because that one is about witches and it's about to be fall. I'm feeling in the spirit. So we'll probably try to pick up a copy of that one soon. But Seventh Veil Salome, solid read. Okay, let's talk about some audiobooks because we've been heavy on the physical reads, but I did, of course, have some audiobook listens this month, starting off with a nonfiction read, which was the first audiobook I listened to this month, and that was Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation by Kristen Kobes-Dumay. So this book, as the title suggests, it's a look at white evangelism in the country and what evangelism really means in this day and age, and how that reflects in politics and the outcome of the most recent elections and the rise of conservatism. The book is structured chronologically, starting with 20th century Christianity in America and how the term evangelism and how that sector of Christianity started becoming more defined and started becoming like its own denomination. And we just follow that through time up until like modern history, the 2016 election, and how white evangelism now pretty much equates to white nationalism and the MAGA movement, and how to a lot of people outside of evangelism, it may seem like a lot of the things that somebody like Donald Trump and a lot of the things that the conservative political ethos is defined as could be in conflict with what Christianity teaches and defines itself as, but in reality they go hand in hand, and how that has happened through time, how evangelists can see somebody like Donald Trump and see like the ultimate form of Christianity in them, how the role of the patriarchy has been very influential to the evangelist movement from its inception. Kristen Kobes-Dumay herself was raised Christian in a very religious household, and although she's since distanced herself from the religion, she has a lot of like insider knowledge and she's very knowledgeable about theology. So her perspective is from somebody who knows about what it's like within these religions. So my main takeaway from this book was that people who call themselves Christians, and especially ones that define themselves as evangelists, they're really, when they talk about their faith, they're really not talking about it from a theological standpoint. Like, they really don't see their faith as something that's defined specifically and only by like Jesus's teachings and like what it says in the Bible. They're not studying the Bible like word for word and trying to come up with different theological explanations for things. Calling yourself a Christian, an evangelist, it really is defining yourself within a culture. They're describing like a vibe, an aesthetic, a political stance, most of all. And that stance is extreme conservatism, it's white nationalism, and going wherever that definition takes them, whether it be like anti-LGBTQ, anti-trans rights, anti-immigrant, racist, xenophobic, whatever the conservative movement is defining themselves in this point in time, that is what evangelism will be defined as, not really by Christianity in a biblical sense. And it's all very deeply rooted in the patriarchy. Surprise, surprise. It's a patriarchal stance and a refusal to give up power by white men who have traditionally held the power. One of the main things that's explored is like why a hyper masculine white war hero is like so central to the idea of Christianity and evangelism, and I thought it was just really hilarious. Some of like the stories that Kristen Dubé tells about Christians throwing tantrums over Jesus being depicted like as too feminine. They're like, that was not Jesus. Jesus was a warrior. Jesus had an AK-47. Like, Jesus was a white man. Like, maybe to you, maybe for your fantasy, but that's not what the Bible says. But yeah, they don't care about what the Bible says. They're just going to shape it to whatever fits their narrative the best. And yeah, this book was like very frustrating at times because I wanted to come away from it just like understanding a lot better and like for things to make sense. I wanted to learn something that perhaps like made it click. It just kind of reinforced what I already knew. Like, oh, this flavor of Christianity is rooted in racism and patriarchy, and it really comes down to like the men on top not wanting to give up or relinquish any power. Like, oh yeah, duh, like water is wet, fork found in kitchen. Yeah, so it's really not surprising, but that's not to say that I didn't find value in this. I thought it was very interesting, very informative. Like, I understand it on an even deeper level now. A lot of like the particular players and history of evangelism and the rising conservatism I wasn't aware of, so I did definitely still learn a lot. And although it's not shocking, I think it was important that this book highlighted a lot of cases where within the ranks and the leadership of Christianity and like different churches and religious sectors, there's been a lot of covering up abuse, a lot of victim blaming, a lot of scapegoating, and making excuses for men who have done very bad and abusive things within the church. So, of course, they're going to find ways to make excuses for the men in power who you would think seem to stand for everything that Christianity says is wrong. But Cobes Dumais is saying, actually, it makes perfect sense. It aligns perfectly with everything that the church has been teaching for the past, I don't know how many decades, you know? And when we see J.D. Vance like twisting theology to meet whatever bigoted take he's trying to shill, it all makes sense. Like, that's pretty par for the course for evangelism. So yeah, an informative one, but at the end of the day, it just was unsurprising. Yeah, that was Jesus and John Wayne. And the only nonfiction book for the month, I went a little heavier with the escapism this month, so that's the only nonfiction we're gonna get. So yeah, the next audiobook that I listened to was definitely a change of pace, and that was a refusal. I'm tired already. A Proposal They Can't Refuse by Natalie Caña. It's funny because I just looked up the title to make sure I got it right, and like the full title is A Proposal They Can't Refuse, a rom-com novel. Like, could they, like, for some reason not just call it A Proposal They Can't Refuse? Is there something else called that they had to distinguish it? Anyway, as you can tell by its full title, this was a rom-com. And it's a romance featuring our protagonist, Camila, who is a Puerto Rican woman. She lives in Chicago. And and her longtime family friend, frenemy, Liam. They've known each other their whole lives because they live next to each other and their families run two different businesses that operate out of like the same establishment. So Camila's family runs a Puerto Rican restaurant and Liam's family runs a whiskey distillery. And his family is Irish. And yeah, so they are longtime family friends. They had like a thing for each other their whole lives, but it never worked out because Liam like took Camila to prom and then ghosted her or something. You know how it goes in these stories, but the premise and like the main way that they reconnect and then their romance kind of starts going in this novel is kind of crazy. So they both have grandparents. Their grandpas are BFFs, and but they're BFFs and they're like known schemers. And their latest scheme is to try to get Liam and Camila together, but they basically like manipulate them, blackmail them, light blackmail into getting engaged. Camila is trying to like revitalize her family's business. She's a chef, she went to culinary school, and she just wants to like bring a more like sophisticated, more upscale vibe to the restaurant because their neighborhood is getting very gentrified and a lot of businesses are being driven out. So she wants to avoid her family's business from that same fate. So she's trying to make it like more bougie for it to have like more appeal to this crowd. So she's trying to make some changes, and her grandpa ultimately has the say to what goes down in the business. So he's like, I'll let you make these changes if you agree to my little scheme to get you and Liam together. You have to marry him and then you can do what you want with the business. I don't know. On Liam's side, him and his grandpa are basically the main people running the whiskey distillery business. Liam has like a very incredibly tragic backstory where he lost like his mother, his father, his sister, like in very tragic ways. And now it's just basically him and his grandpa. And he finds out his grandpa has stage 4 cancer, and his grandpa is like, I'll only get treatment if you marry Camila, which is insane. So that is how these manipulative grandpas convince Liam and Camila to go through with a fake engagement. And that's like the main trope of this is kind of like a second chance, a little bit enemies to lovers, mostly fake engagement. And yeah, it just goes from there. It's very silly. Things that I liked about this, the Puerto Rican representation was really good. I enjoyed hearing about like all the different Puerto Rican dishes that Camila was making. Her and her family's dynamic was, I think, very real. And from what I've heard, so this was my book club. I'm in a Latina book club. And based on like our discussion for this book, a lot of people really related to the family dynamic. And we all agreed that it was very toxic, not a great example of family relationships, but unfortunately kind of an accurate one. So, you know, I appreciate the family dynamic aspect in terms of like, this is realistic for Latino and Puerto Rican families, probably for other cultures as well, but we were just concentrating on this one and that's what I have seen. But yeah, their family dynamic was really toxic, and I feel like although it was an accurate representation, like the way that things were resolved was not very healthy. Nobody that I felt was in the wrong and like very kind of abusive towards Camila. They never took accountability for their actions. Yeah, I just didn't like how things were resolved and brushed under the rug. And like a lot of hurtful things were said, especially to Camila, that were never addressed or apologized for. And yeah, I don't know. I didn't love a lot of the conflict resolution aspects of this. I felt like, yeah, I don't know, the dynamic was really toxic and I didn't like it. Liam has been through a lot of shit. He's got a lot of baggage. And there was a part in the story where he was like, I am in no place to be in a relationship right now. Like, I've got a lot of healing to do before I can be in a relationship and properly be somebody's partner. And I agree. I think it should have just ended that. I think we should have said, let's individually go to therapy, work on ourselves for a few years, and then circle back and see if we want to explore what this relationship could be. But of course, that would have been a very anticlimactic ending to a romance. So yeah, there was just too much toxicity going on, even for my ability to suspend my disbelief for a silly, goofy rom-com. I was like, I can't support this. It's too much. And yeah, I don't know. I just didn't like it. I couldn't suspend my disbelief enough with like all the different, like the hijinks and the relationships. It was just too much. I did not enjoy this book, unfortunately. I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. It is what it is, especially with romances for me. There's some rare winners, a lot of duds, and unfortunately this was on the low side. Yeah, the best thing about this was the narrator. The narrator was great. There was a single narrator, although there was dual POVs. We got Camila's POV and Liam's POV. And the narrator did a great job because like her pronunciation for Spanish words was great. Her Puerto Rican accent was great. And then she even had Irish accents for Liam's grandpa. That was really cool and fun. And yeah, the best part of this whole audiobook experience. So can't say I recommend, but it is what it is. A proposal they can't refuse. Okay, next was Comfort Me with Apples, which was also an audiobook listen. The author of this is Catherine M. Valente, and this was a really quick read. It's a novella, really. I think the audiobook was like 2 hours long or something. And yeah, because it's so quick, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to say without like veering into spoilers, but the main premise of this is that we're following a woman who lives in a very idealistic sounding community. It's kind of like a gated community where just everything is perfect. Her life is perfect. She has the perfect husband, and she feels like she was meant for this life, meant for him. Everything is just so perfect. She's very content and unquestioning of everything around her until some things start happening that seem kind of strange, kind of scary, and, you know, things may not be as idealistic as they seem on the surface. So that's pretty much the gist of it. It was giving me like dystopian Don't Worry Darling vibes at first, because it's like, you know, a woman who's in this like closed off community that seems like very perfect and ideal until you start uncovering things. I really enjoyed like the tone of it. It was very eerie, which I appreciate. And as we start discovering things, like I really like those type of stories where we start learning the truth about what's going on. And then this took a turn that I was not expecting. And once that twist happened, I was like, oh, this is not the direction I thought it was going. But like, I wasn't mad about it, but I also was like, okay, interesting. It was different than I thought it was going to be. I enjoyed the ride. It was, like I said, very quick, a couple hours, and it was done. It was like an allegory that was, yeah, like I said, just interesting. I can't say that I loved it. It wasn't like a 5-star, nailed the landing, nailed the metaphors for me, but it was a fun ride all the same. If you're looking for something like spooky and eerie and a little bit bizarre, I would recommend this. Especially if you've got like a couple of hours to kill and want to like breeze through something quickly. It was a fun time. Comfort Me with Apples, I gave it 3.5 stars, I think. Okay, we're nearing the end, and that was actually all the books that I finished properly in August. I've got a couple more books to talk about, but these I finished in September, but whatever. And these I don't have notes for because I finished them pretty recently and I'm just going to go off the top of the dome. Hopefully I remember enough to have some thoughts on. But the next physical book that I read was Catalina by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. I got that right. I have read Carla Cornejo Villavicencio's other book, The Undocumented Americans. That one is a nonfiction, and that one is really, really good. I really enjoyed that. And this is her venturing into fiction. And this is literary fiction. I think it's very inspired by like Carla's own experiences. She is an undocumented immigrant. She is a dreamer. And in The Undocumented Americans, we do get to hear a little bit about her own backstory. So that is why I'm making the assumption that a lot of the stuff that she writes about in Catalina is from her own experiences. But this is a fictional book, and we're following Catalina, who is a student at Harvard. She's also undocumented, and her grandparents who she lives with and who have raised her for a long time in the US are also undocumented. So we're just following her through a few semesters in Harvard where she's just trying to navigate academia, navigate life as a first generation American, as an undocumented immigrant in an Ivy League. So yeah, this was a very interesting read. I think Carla Cornejo Villavicencio is really, really smart. She has a lot of great insights, and she has firsthand insights as to what it's like to be an undocumented immigrant, trying to navigate life, trying to just be a normal college student, graduate, navigate academia, but at the same time, like always having this looming threat over you, and also always feeling the battle of like being in a position where you have the pressure of like being a model immigrant, always trying to be the perfect representation for all dreamers, for all undocumented immigrants, like trying to be the picture of. Okay, battery died. I charged it a little bit, but I'm gonna try to just be quick so it doesn't die again. But I was saying that, yeah, she has to balance like the juxtaposition of trying to be like this model minority, perfect immigrant, American dream, what people expect and want to see out of a dreamer, out of a undocumented immigrant, and then also just trying to be a regular college student, having regular college student experiences. You go party, you do your academic work, you meet a guy, you hoe around. She's just your typical college student, but she has to balance that with like this life of being an undocumented immigrant and her family also being undocumented and trying to be like the legal help for them and balancing like her tricky relationship with them as well because they have like kind of a toxic dynamic, but also like she clearly loves them, wants to protect them. And so yeah, it was very interesting. It was a little bit like stream of consciousness. The flow just like goes and goes, and it follows Catalina's thoughts and it veers different directions. So it's not super structured, but I didn't mind it. I think Carla Cornejo Villavicencio has a lot of really great, interesting things to say. She's really funny. And I think how close the story is to her really helped the book and the heart of the book. I felt like it was really there and real. Yeah, I had a good time with it, but I thought the ending was a little abrupt and it didn't feel super satisfying, which I feel like maybe was just Carla's way of saying like, this experience can just feel like this sometimes. Like you're trying to make it a perfect, digestible story, and sometimes it's just not. Like life throws shit at you. You just have to go with the flow, and there wasn't necessarily like a clean and nice bow tied at the end of the story, but maybe that's how she meant it to end and feel. I'm not sure, but yeah, that was like the only time that I felt like, oh, maybe I wanted like a little more. But I had a good time with it. I like Carla Conejo Villavicencio's writing. So that was Catalina. It had been on my TBR for a minute. I was really excited to read it, so I'm glad that I did and that it did not disappoint. Last but not least was my latest audiobook listen, which was Promising Young Women by Jessica Knoll. And this is kind of a historical fiction, kind of like a true crime thriller. It's fictional, but it is very much inspired by Ted Bundy and his victims in Florida towards the later years of his spree of serial killings, but we're following mostly the perspective of Pamela Mitokaya, who lives in Florida. She's a student at FSU and she's part of a sorority. She's the president of a sorority. So she lives in a sorority house with her sisters, and this sorority house ends up being one of the serial killer's targets, and he ends up breaking in one night, killing 2 of her sorority sisters, injuring a couple others, and then Pamela was witness to it. She saw the killer as he was making his escape, and then as a result, she ends up being like a key witness to the case and the trial of this individual. We're following mostly Pamela's perspective. When we start, it's been maybe like 20 years since the murders happened, and Pamela is reflecting on this incident because the trial and some of the potential victims of the murderer are still under investigation all these years later. So some things are uncovered where she has to revisit a lot of the things that happened back in the day. So we're following her as this happened, and then the subsequent days and all the events leading up to the eventual trial of this man. And then we're also seeing a couple of other characters who end up intersecting with this story and who end up being somehow involved because this killer, inspired by Ted Bundy, was moving through different states and he had a lot of victims. So we see a couple of their stories as well. I liked it overall. I think it was trying to, like, the main goal of it was to center the women who were victims of cases like Ted Bundy and other famous serial killers who we hear a lot about, and trying to shift the narrative and take the spotlight away from the men who committed these crimes themselves and to some of the victims, and talk about how women were targeted, and especially around the time when this happened, which was in the 70s, 60s, 70s, before serial killers were a known and defined type of murderer. It was easier for women to be targeted because, first of all, we didn't know that this type of killer was a thing. Second of all, women are socialized to be polite, to not talk back to men, to not belittle men, to always be in the subservient role to men. So it was a lot easier for women to be taken advantage of and to be put into these situations where they felt like they couldn't refuse, like when a man was asking them for help, even if they felt like it was an uncomfortable situation. Like, we've just been socialized in that way. And I'm not saying like that's not a thing anymore, but it definitely was a lot more prevalent in that time period. And I like the fact that she emphasized that, because like even to this day, when we hear about somebody like Ted Bundy, the narrative around it is that they were so charming and that they were so smart and that they used like their incredible charisma and intelligence to trick these women, and that they were so likable and charismatic and like No, not necessarily. They were just creepy men who, like, as women, even when we're feeling creeped out, even when our intuition is telling us one thing, our socialization and society tells us that we need to be nice and that we need to not make men feel bad, even when they're creepy and are putting us in uncomfortable positions. So, I like that she really emphasized, like, this guy was not a genius. He was not the most charismatic person in the world. He was a creep. So yeah, that was what this story was about, really like recentering the narrative to focus on the victims and these like incredible women who were specifically targeted because they were incredible women, who the man, the killer in comparison, really was threatened by and outshined by, and as a result felt the need to like exert his power in this way and take their lives. And I thought it was, I think it succeeded in doing what it was setting out to do. It was a compelling story. I was interested the whole way through. I enjoyed the writing. I think it ended up succeeding in what it was trying to do, but I think it did like teeter on the edge of like being a little bit sensationalist, because although it is a fictionalized version of events, it was very obviously and very overtly inspired by Ted Bundy and like these specific murders that he committed in Florida. So I don't know, like you are recentering the story to focus on the women, but at the same time, like you're still taking a real life case and not necessarily exploiting it, but like using it to build your narrative. And like it kind of in a way still ends up being about specifically Ted Bundy, you know what I mean? Like we can choose not to say his name throughout this entire novel, which the author did, and you know, she was trying to make a point, but like we all know it's Ted Bundy. We all end up having this specific picture in our minds about who the perpetrator and the victims were. So I don't know, it was like on the edge for me. I think it still ended up being a good book. It stayed on this side of like being sensationalizing this and rehashing something that has been talked about ad nauseum, you know, like we don't need to keep talking about Ted Bundy over and over. But like, yeah, I thought it was fine. It reminded me, last year it was one of my first reading blogs. I read Notes on an Execution, which I think is along the same veins of like a serial killer, but taking that story and centering it around the women in his life, whether that be the victims or just like women who played a part in his life and his story. And I thought Notes on an Execution did that a little more elegantly. I think that one had more interesting things to say. So if I had to choose between those two similar stories, I would probably go Notes on an Execution. But that's not to say I didn't enjoy this book. I thought it was good and I enjoyed the queer representation. And yeah, not a perfect book, but I enjoyed it for what it was. And I think I ended up giving it 4 stars. So yeah, that was my latest audiobook listen, and that brings us to the end of this video. Thanks for being here. Thanks for bearing with the technical difficulties. Yeah, it was a really good reading month. I'm looking forward to fall reads. I don't have like anything specific lined up. I'm very much just like in a mood reading kind of mood. Like I don't want to pressure myself to read anything, but I do have some very exciting books in my radar and on my physical TBR shelf right now. So I am looking forward to getting to those. I'm looking forward to decorating for fall. It's bang season. I finally cut my bangs because the summer heat is going away. Yeah, it's been feeling nice and crisp, and I'm looking forward to fall so much. Let me know what you've been reading. Let me know what books you have on your docket. And if you have read any of the books that I talked about today, I would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for being here. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can keep yapping about books. And I will catch you in the next one. Bye, amigos.